I was 29 the first time someone called me a stranger who just happens to carry the Whitmore name. The words came from a distant aunt during the family's spring gathering at the estate in Ridgefield, Connecticut, a grand home where every painting was selected in cold gray tones, and any sign of emotion was seen as a flaw. I smiled, finished my odorless white wine, and thought to myself, that's fine. She's not the first to feel that way, just the first bold enough to say it out loud while I was standing right there. The Whitmores had long been known in the Northeast real estate scene. My great-grandfather, Marshall Whitmore, was once dubbed the man who turned bricks into gold by Fortune Real Assets after transforming an old dye factory into luxury housing developments across Vermont post-World War II. Since then, each generation had added to the legacy with landmark deals, always accompanied by pride hierarchy and an internal value system only insiders could decode. My father, Ethan Whitmore, was the youngest of the family, but he fell in love with and married a woman the rest of them saw as a misstep, my mother, Rachel Monroe, a public kindergarten teacher in Boston. No lineage, no assets, no prestigious surname. Just a gentle smile, eyes that listened, and a warm heart that somehow sustained a marriage completely misaligned with his family's expectations. I was the outcome of that marriage. Audrey Monroe Whitmore, a long name that no one on my father's side ever used. To them, I was simply the youngest son's girl, or the one who never quite fit. We lived in a two-story house in the suburbs of Newton, Massachusetts, miles away from the stone-gray mansions the Whitmores referred to as heritage properties. Our backyard was just big enough to grow summer strawberries. The living room always smelled like cinnamon cookies my mom baked every Friday night. My dad worked as a freelance architect, designing homes for newlywed couples buying their first place. His blueprints had no European domes or marble columns, just sunlight, open space, and room for a hammock or a baby grand piano. My mom taught me to read when I was 3. She didn't push me like those perfectionist mothers. She simply believed a child who listened to stories wouldn't lose herself growing up. I still remember those winter nights when she read fairy tales to me over soft jazz playing from the old radio. Those memories are the only treasures I have left of them. Because one fall weekend when I was 16, everything came to an end. The Volvo my parents rented for a weekend trip to Cape Ann veered off the freeway after a semi-driver fell asleep at the wheel. The death notice came that Monday morning. When the Newton police chief knocked on our door and asked, "Do you have any family nearby?" I stuttered a single name, Eleanor Whitmore. My grandmother. The only one who hadn't fully turned her back on my father. And the one who personally came to pick me up from temporary foster care, wearing a long gray trench coat, heels, and an expressionless face. When I climbed into the back seat of her sleek black Jaguar, she didn't ask if I was hungry, didn't ask where I wanted to go. She just said, "Starting today, you live with me, and you'll learn not to be weak." The Whitmore mansion stood at the top of Pine Hill, a place I had visited only 3 times for holidays. Now it was home. But I never called it that. It was cold, literally, and otherwise. Every room silent like a library. Every glance like a flashlight sweeping, then judging. Yet within those cold walls, I began learning the kind of lessons no classroom ever taught. My grandmother Eleanor wasn't like the others. In a family obsessed with image, she was the only one who understood essence. She once told me, "Audrey, don't look at people who flaunt. The truly wealthy never need to say they are." From 16 to 19, I lived under her roof. And I studied like my survival depended on it. She didn't teach me how to wear ball gowns or hold a wine glass properly. She taught me how to read a balance sheet, how to analyze population trends to predict which neighborhood would appreciate in the next 5 years, how a run-down apartment near a subway station could be more valuable than a remote mansion if you knew what to look for. We weren't close in a cozy, hugging, whispering secrets kind of way, but on the nights she allowed me to sit in her study, going over spreadsheets, while she calmly explained why a foreclosed property held more promise than it seemed I understood. That was love in her language. She passed away the spring I turned 20, right before I graduated with a finance degree. In her will, she left $80,000 to each grandchild as a test. Me, I didn't buy a shiny new Lexus. Didn't take a month-long trip through Europe like my cousins. I bought a modest two-bedroom condo in Dorchester, still called a working-class area by many. But I knew, and so did she, that it was the start of something bigger. It took me just 3 years to prove it. But to the Whitmores, I remained poor little Audrey, daughter of that odd Ethan. None of them knew what I'd quietly built over nearly a decade. But the day they'd have to face it, it was coming soon. They called me the girl who's too frugal. At Chloe's birthday party, my cousin's event in a penthouse worth nearly $5 million on Manhattan's Upper West Side, I arrived exactly on time in a simple gray wool coat, holding a small gift wrapped in craft paper. Some cousins smirked. Dean, the one who once bragged about buying a Ferrari just for weekends, raised an eyebrow. Audrey, still driving that 2010 Camry, does it even start? I smiled, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and replied lightly, better than expected. Low maintenance, fuel efficient, no one bothers it. Dean scoffed and turned away. They were used to me not reacting. None of them saw me as worth noticing, especially compared to themselves, flaunting deals funded by their parents, pampered heirs living on family capital. As for me, I chose a different path. After Grandma passed, I didn't spend a single dollar chasing status. I reached out to Joseph Quinn, the attorney, who had been Eleanor's right hand for over 3 decades. He was a quiet man, his eyes always cautious, like every sentence could be subpoenaed. But he was the only legal professional in New England who spoke to me with respect without checking my income sheet. We met at an old cafe in downtown Boston, amid the hiss of the espresso machine and the creak of wooden chairs. I want to follow what she taught me. Quietly. No one needs to know, I told him. Joseph pulled a folder from his coat pocket. Inside was a list of undervalued plots across Dorchester, Hyde Park, and even parts of West Lynn, places traditional investors avoided due to crime rates and uneven infrastructure. Others see risk. You see future, don't you? He asked. I nodded. We created our first LLC, Gray Birch Holdings. Under this company, I bought a 3-story historic home in Dorchester for $320,000, nearly half the market rate, because of unresolved title issues Joseph cleared in a week. I lived on the top floor, rented the other 2, and reinvested the cash flow into fixing the roof, upgrading plumbing, repainting the facade. In less than 12 months, the home appreciated by 40%. I sold it and reinvested into 2 other properties in Chelsea and Revere. Every deal silent. Assets under the company name, correspondence through Joseph's law office, property managers hired through third parties. Not a single paper trail linked Audrey Whitmore to the steadily compounding assets. No photos. No public records. Nothing. Meanwhile, my cousins kept buying condos in Midtown, throwing money into short-term NFT schemes, and racing to be quoted in Forbes under 30. They believed I was grinding as a mid-tier insurance analyst, something I never corrected. But the reports I sent Joseph each month told a different story. By the time I turned 28, I held 6 rental properties, 2 small commercial spaces on 5-year leases, and 3 undeveloped lots near an upcoming transit expansion. Gray Birch Holdings' net worth stood at $14 million, with post-tax annual profits nearing $800,000. I still lived in a modest 2-bedroom rental in Cambridge, drove my old silver Camry, and used the oldest working phone model I could find. I wasn't afraid of frugality, I chose it, because I knew one day I'd need that silence. I didn't wear a Rolex, but I knew the exact minute the markets opened. I didn't dine at the Modern, but I memorized every line in the quarterly trend reports. I wasn't flashy in the family's eyes, and that was a gift. Because while they competed to see who donated the most to the Museum of Fine Arts Gala, I quietly became the majority owner of one of the 3 office buildings on Beacon Street, where the Whitmore Trust held board meetings. They had no idea I had acquired over 70% of that building's remaining mortgage through another company, Birchstone Capital, a second LLC Joseph helped form. publicly owned by two Canadian investors, privately entirely controlled by me through a layered structure. I didn't need them to know, not yet. But I remembered every word they said, every furrowed brow at my canvas tote bag, every pitiful glance when I brought pre-made coffee instead of ordering on site. I held on to it all like capital. One day, when the timing is right, it will yield returns. Just like everything else I've quietly built. I've never forgotten the family gathering on my 30th birthday, the day the entire Whitmore clan gathered in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, under chandeliers and overpriced champagne, and burst into laughter when I walked in. Oh, Audrey, still holding on to that sustainable minimalism look. You, Aunt Sylvia bellowed, making the entire table turn. I didn't respond. The olive blazer I wore that day was an end-of-season clearance. Fine, but it fit like it was tailored. The suede heels were worn down at the back, but I polished them the night before. They didn't care. To them there were only two kinds of people, those who wore the latest Chanel collection and those who had no business being there. The event was the Whitmore Legacy Summit, a polished name for what was really a self-congratulatory performance festival. A yearly family reunion dressed up as an achievement parade. To the right, Lucas Uncle Andrew's grandson rambled about his third estate in Napa Valley, complete with private golf greens. To the left, Melissa casually pulled out her recent Modern Wealth Women feature from her Chanel purse, accidentally leaving it atop her linen napkin. "So, Audrey, what have you been up to these past few years?" she asked with a smile, sharp as a blade. Still doing those little freelance consulting things, I was about to answer, when Jacob, who earned his MBA on Grandma's trust fund, cut in. "Where's she living now?" "Oh, right, still that rental in Cambridge. Right, tiny place." I passed by it once. Honestly sad. Laughter rippled down the table like a reflex. I poured more water and answered evenly, "Still there. Has a red maple outside the window. In fall, the view is so perfect I don't even need a golf course." That quieted a few. But then, Blake, my venture capitalist cousin, snorted, "You should really settle down. Got a boyfriend yet, or still waiting for some doctor to rescue you from thrift life?" Before I could answer, Aunt Sylvia jumped in. "She's right. A Whitmore woman with no ring at 30 just feels off. At your age, your mom had 3 kids and a $2 million home." Her eyes slid over me, loaded with meaning. Every sentence was a blade to my dignity. But no one noticed. Or maybe they didn't think I had enough self-respect to be wounded. I smiled lightly, as if they'd just told a dry joke. Looking around the room, draped in white silk, the lights bouncing off their diamond watches, I suddenly realized the only thing sparkling here wasn't the crystal, but the pretense. The party ended with a speech from Uncle Andrew, chairman of the family estate board. He stood at the podium and slowly read out the list of those recognized for notable contributions to the Whitmore name this year. My name wasn't on it, of course. But Lucas was mentioned for opening a rooftop calf chain in Miami, even though I'd heard he was sued last month over unpaid rent. Melissa made the list thanks to a fluff interview that made the rounds in her mother's friend group. Even Peter, who nearly went bankrupt this year, was honored for investing in a family-branded NFT. When Uncle Andrew finished, everyone clapped enthusiastically. I sat still, hands resting on my skirt. No one turned to look at me. No one knew that inside the leather bag I carried that day was a purchase offer for equity in an office building on Washington Street, where Lucas currently leased a temporary floor. As the party ended, I stepped out of the hotel into the early winter chill. No one saw me off. No one asked how I was getting home. A Mercedes G-Class sped by Melissa inside, live streaming about independent women. As for me, I crossed the street and climbed into my Camry, parked 3 blocks away. The side mirror shimmered with mist. I wiped the glass, started the engine, and quietly pulled away from what was supposed to be a symbol of unity, but had long become a stage for elitism. That night, back in my small Cambridge apartment, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood there, looking out at the city's glow from my window. My hand still gripped the folder. Inside was the newest title deed in my name, a small hotel in South End, currently being reappraised post-renovation. The family could keep sneering. Let them believe I was the stubborn poor one. The less they paid attention, the easier it was for me to keep going. But this summer, the family gathering would take place as usual at the Ridgefield estate. And this time, I'd be bringing something they'd never see coming, something that would silence the entire ballroom. In mid-December, Boston was swallowed in a cold gray freeze. Snow blanketed the rooftops of Beacon Hill, where I had just signed the purchase agreement for my 15th building through Westshade Partners, an LLC I created 6 months ago, registered through a representative office in Vermont. On the outside, no one knew a thing. They still called me Poor Audrey with that sugar-coated pity. But in the asset management system I'd built over 9 years, every dollar was routed, reinvested, and restructured along the exact growth models my grandmother taught me: quiet, precise, emotionless. I didn't need a dazzling fade. I only needed deeds. The 15th property was a 5-story apartment complex in Jamaica Plain with a total of 32 units. Among them, 5 were currently leased to people I saw every year at Whitmore family events. My second uncle, Mr. Nathan, lived on the 3rd floor with his new wife. Lily, Aunt Andrew's granddaughter, rented the penthouse overlooking the park. Melissa, the one who once mocked me for not being able to afford gas, now paid over $3,000 a month for the unit I approved for renovation last spring. No one suspected a thing. They assumed the building had been bought by a Canadian investment group because the listed owner was Borealis Housing Inc. But only Joseph, and that entire structure was a shell for what I was really building, a real estate empire with no Whitmore name attached. The asset report Joseph gave me last week made it clear the total net value of my portfolio now exceeded $74 million, with a stable profit margin of 11.4%. Everything was distributed across subsidiaries, with offices in Delaware, Vermont, even one in Utah where owner identity protection laws were airtight. I didn't need their recognition, but I did need security, because when they found out, the reaction wouldn't just be shock. They'd try to take it back, fold me into a game they controlled. The properties I held weren't just buildings, land, or office towers. Each one was acquired after months of data analysis, migration trends, infrastructure development rates, behavioral patterns of younger renters. I didn't follow instincts. I read spreadsheets, and I chose investments like I chose battles. The building in South Boston, with its shared gym and reclaimed wood flooring, was now attracting young tech workers migrating out of Cambridge due to skyrocketing rents. The 3-house complex in Roxbury, once undervalued because of crime rates, was steadily appreciating after the city added a new bus line directly to downtown. I kept most of the profits, spending only a sliver on personal life. The Camry still ran fine. The rented apartment in Cambridge was upgraded down to the trim, nothing flashy, but efficient and orderly. Someone once said I lived like I was hiding. They were wrong. I was pulling back like an arrow just to fly farther. Joseph once asked me while signing the deal for my first hotel in Providence, "Do you ever plan to go public with all this, or will it stay hidden forever?" I stayed quiet for a long moment, and finally said, when they try to sell the estate Grandma left behind, "I'll step forward." He nodded, said nothing more. He understood, because he had witnessed them tear down everything my grandmother built in the name of profit, in the name of modernization. That estate, the one I lived in for 3 years, after losing my parents, was now being discussed for sale to a luxury hotel chain. The family meeting this March in Ridgefield would be when Richard, the cousin who heads the Asset Council, would propose breaking the shares and selling them to a northeastern developer. What they didn't know was I had quietly bought back nearly 29% of the family's dispersed shares over the last 2 years, most through shell companies in non-controlling interest transactions. Shares from disinterested cousins, elderly uncles in need of cash for medical bills, and distant relatives they never even bothered to invite. I call it memory collection, the forgotten fragments of a legacy they thought had lost its value. When I held the latest confirmation from the Connecticut Trust Company, verifying that I, through Eastridge Holdings, had become the second largest shareholder of the estate, I didn't feel excited. I only felt one step away. Just one more step and I'd have the authority to block the fire sale they were scheming. When that moment came, I wouldn't need to say much. I'd just give them the number. And watch each one of them, the ones who laughed in my face, the ones who suggested I should just marry rich, come to terms with the truth, the one they thought was the loser, is holding the final move. That Saturday afternoon, I stood alone at the second-floor window of the Whitmore estate in Ridgefield. Below, the rose garden that Eleanor once tended with care had faded, some bushes cut down because they were not consistent with the new landscape, according to the supervisor hired in advance of the family meeting. A gust of wind through the old wall joints sent a chill through me. This house used to be my refuge when the outside world grew too cold to bear. Now the very people who shared my blood were planning to tear it apart, replacing it with tempered glass and rooftop pools. The meeting was set for 4 p.m. I arrived an hour early, not to do anything, just to hear the creaking of the old wood floors beneath my steps. The reading room where Grandma once taught me how to read financial statements still had the original oak table, except now it was topped with a projector and luxury-branded bottled water. Car engines rumbled outside the gate. A convoy of shiny SUVs pulled into the east lot. Doors slammed shut, heels clacked against the cold pavement. People who hadn't set foot here in years now swarmed in, drawn by the scent of profit. Uncle Richard, the one who juggled shares like a puppeteer, was the first to enter. Cashmere coat, Hermes tie, Mont Blanc briefcase. On his arm was his third wife, Heather, 15 years in modeling, never once met Eleanor. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. To him, I was just 2% of voting rights and a seat at the far end of the table. No one knew that 30 minutes earlier I had signed the final transfer granting nearly 33% of scattered family shares to a trust called Elmridge Foundation under my sole direction. The meeting began right on time, just like Richard always insisted. His voice was steady, confident, like he was pitching a startup instead of addressing the family council. This estate, as everyone knows, is wasting its potential. Sitting on 5 acres in a market where property values have gone up 22% in just 4 quarters. If we don't act, we miss the opportunity. Melissa nodded eagerly. Blake raised his hand, not to object, but to brag he'd just been invited to consult on a Cape Cod resort project. No one mentioned Eleanor. Not one word. Not one picture. I placed my hand on the edge of the table, feeling the aged wood beneath my fingers. For a few seconds, a memory returned, Grandma reading to me, saying real assets aren't numbers. They're what you leave behind when you're no longer here. Richard pressed a button, and the screen displayed renderings of the Whitmore residences, 3 luxury condo towers with tennis courts, a spa, and boutique shopping. He spoke of expected revenue, shared returns, and modernization in the spirit of legacy. This is a reasonable, modern step forward, beneficial to all of us, Richard concluded, smiling like the deal was already sealed. I raised my hand. The room fell silent, not out of respect, but surprise. This house is not a liquidity asset. It's the last remnant of the person who built what you all spend every quarter. Richard arched a brow, his tone dismissive. Audrey, emotional bias can't dictate financial decisions. Your grandmother was more pragmatic than anyone. She wouldn't keep a pile of concrete for sentimental dreams. I opened my folder and handed it to the legal assistant near the projector. This is the official transfer of 33.4% of shares from family members over the past 6 months. The Elmridge Foundation now holds 35.6% of voting rights. Richard froze. A wave of murmurs spread through the room like a current. What? Melissa shot up. No way. I nodded, calm. I bought out Aunt Ellen's shares, Uncle Carl's, and even Zach's, who moved to Texas and no longer cares about heritage. All legally assigned to me. Richard went pale. Without a majority, the project couldn't proceed. You can't just sabotage the family's future like this, Blake shouted, his face turning red. This is our future. I looked directly at him. Your future is made of pool tiles. I'm preserving what Grandma spent a lifetime building. A home A symbol. A root you all forgot. My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a blade. If you want to negotiate, I'm open to discussing a family fund model, preserving the estate as a center for financial education and family history. If you just want a payout, I won't give up a cent. No one spoke. Heather stared at the screen, searching for an escape. Richard stepped back, his eyes locked on me, not with scorn this time, but cold calculation. I turned away, heading toward the open glass doors. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside, the pale sunlight spread over the lawn, shining on the stone tiles Grandma once handpicked from an old Charleston shop. The wall clock struck 4:57 when Richard stepped down from his seat and tapped the oak podium's mic. Before we close today's meeting, I'd like to clarify something. There seems to be confusion about voting structures and actual ownership, especially from certain individuals without a real role in managing joint assets. He glanced at me, the contempt not even disguised. This family has always welcomed everyone, even those who've chosen modest lifestyles, perhaps too unstable to contribute financially, but we still show them respect, right? Scattered snickers, tight-lipped smiles. Blake leaned toward Victoria, whispered something, and she laughed aloud. I stood up, slowly. I didn't look at anyone. I simply pulled a black leather file folder from my bag and placed it on the table. It seems everyone's been quite busy making assumptions about me. Perhaps it's time we stop guessing and look at the facts. My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed through the silent room. I opened the folder and flipped through each page. Deliberately. Each page I laid flat on the table landed like a strike on their collective pride. This is a consolidated summary of assets legally owned by entities under my control, including Gray Birch Holdings, Westshade Partners, and Elmridge Foundation. As of the most recent quarter, the total market valuation stands at $73,722,000. Brad choked mid-sip of his coffee. Melissa dropped her iPad onto the table, stunned. What? She gasped. I looked straight at Richard. I don't need power to be respected. But when I'm treated like a burden, I believe I have the right to respond. Everyone here's said I wasn't capable, not qualified, not worthy of the family name. So I propose we revisit that conclusion. I pulled out the next document, a deed to the 1042 Tremont Street complex, currently rented to 5 family members in high-end units. This is the purchase contract for the property executed via Horizon Residential, a subsidiary of Westshade. I approved every renovation you all complained about for disrupting your late weekend mornings. Victoria turned pale. Lily pushed her chair back, lips tightly pressed. Additionally, the office building in Beacon Hill, where Brad rents the 3rd floor for his strategic investment project, currently sits under the Elmridge Trust, legally signed over to me last August. Brad stammered, "You've been spying on me." "No. I've just been managing my assets where you happen to be 2 months behind on rent." Richard leaned forward, eyes sharp as blades. "What's your play here, Audrey, using personal investments to threaten your own family?" I pressed my lips together and opened the final page. It was printed on white paper, watermark logo, faint, titled Certificate of Consolidated Shareholding, Elmridge Foundation. No, I'm simply clarifying that what you're calling the collective will is based on a false assumption about ownership structure. Elmridge currently holds 35.6% of voting rights, enough to veto any strategic decision, including the sale or demolition of core properties like Eleanor's estate. I turned slightly, walked to the projector panel. A gentle tap brought up the next slide, an organizational chart of subsidiaries, capital flows, every arrow pointing to one name, Audrey Monroe Whitmore. Silence. Richard didn't move, his face drained, as if someone had just hijacked a chessboard he'd spent years preparing. I closed the file and scanned the room, faces stripped of smugness. Starting today, I'll be present at every estate board meeting. I'm also calling for a full financial audit of all investment branches from the past 3 years, including undocumented capital withdrawals. Blake shouted, "What are you trying to do? Overthrow the entire system?" I tilted my head slightly, voice light as air. No. I just want to rewrite the definition of family in this house. Jessica, the only one who had remained silent, suddenly clapped. Once. Then twice. The room erupted in applause. Whether from fear, respect, or lack of choice, no one knew. I stepped out of the meeting room, walking down the mirror-lined hallway. In the reflection, I saw myself not the girl who once stood on the sidelines of dinner, quietly serving salad. That night, the Whitmore mansion stayed lit far later than usual. The grand rooms lay hushed after the storm of a meeting, only my footsteps echoed down the wooden hall as I returned to Eleanor's old study. I didn't go back to the hotel like the others. Martha, the housekeeper who had served the family for 4 decades, had prepared a teapot placed beside Eleanor's notebook where she once jotted ideas for community finance projects she never got to realize. I sat on the sofa, by the window, moonlight spilling over the cream-colored pages. There, in neat blue ink, Grandma had once written, "True wealth isn't found in valuation. It's found in what you leave for those who couldn't afford it themselves." I had started planning this over a year ago, when I first heard whispers of Richard secretly negotiating with Westfield developers to turn this land into luxury condos. The more leaked contracts I reviewed, the clearer it became if I didn't act, everything would be erased under the name of modernization. The next morning, in the following closed-door session, I spoke plainly: this estate will not be sold. Per voting terms, I am officially exercising my veto rights 35.6% to terminate all negotiations with Westfield and any related parties. No one could object. They no longer had the leverage. Blake whispered something to Victoria, but both fell silent when I pulled a copy of the trust charter from my folder. I also hereby announce the Whitmore Mansion will be repurposed under the governance of a non-profit foundation legally registered in the state of Connecticut. I held up the first page. A simple logo, a dried rose branch stretched across the name, the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. Every eye in the room turned toward me. This foundation will oversee the mansion with 3 goals: preserve the heritage architecture, open a financial literacy center for low-income youth, and provide transitional housing for single women rebuilding independent lives. Richard jumped up. "Are you insane? You're turning this place into a charity center?" I nodded. "Exactly. A practical financial education hub, something many in this room might want to revisit." Martha stood quietly at the meeting room door. No one noticed her, but I saw the glisten in her eyes. I turned back to the stunned room. This estate once saved children like me from being forgotten. I won't let it become a valet lot for luxury weddings or a $3,000 a year yoga retreat. Brad let out a harsh laugh. "You think you'll be celebrated for that performative charity act? No one's coming here to learn how to budget, Audrey." I didn't respond. I simply took out my phone and played a short video, a clip of high school students at a public school in South Boston, learning how to build a personal budget. It was the first pilot program I funded through Elmridge. On screen, a 16-year-old girl stood before her class, presenting a breakdown of expenses and income for a 6-member family living off a single paycheck. No one said a word when the clip ended. I closed the phone and stood up. "You may not value this, but there are countless people out there who need a place to start over." And I chose to begin with the home, where my grandmother once taught me how to rise after my first fall. 6 weeks later, renovations began. I hired the same team of architects who had restored historic landmarks in Salem. Every brick, every doorway, every roof tile was preserved in its original layout, only reinforced with moisture-proofing and upgraded wiring. The main dining room was transformed into a modern classroom with digital boards and textbooks sourced from academic publishers. The East Parlor became a transitional housing space for single mothers seeking stability for their children. The North Wing, once guest quarters, was repurposed into a small dormitory for unpaid interns from local community finance programs who helped run the classes. In the basement, I had a financial archive installed dedicated to New England's economic history. It housed my grandmother's investment journals, stock price tracking ledgers, and handwritten letters to the city planning board from 1978 when she had fought to stop the demolition of an immigrant housing block for a central parking lot. On Inauguration Day, I didn't send out formal invites to my family. I left a single message on the internal family board if you still remember what this house used to become. If not, that's fine too. They came. Every one of them. No one dared voice a complaint, as over 100 local residents packed into the trial classroom as three mothers holding babies offered tearful thanks for finally having a safe space after months of living out of their cars. Richard stepped into the backyard without saying a word. Melissa avoided my eyes. Only Jessica approached me, gently clasping my wrist. Grandma's smiling right now. Somewhere. I gave her hand a light squeeze and looked out toward the rose garden blooming again, not perfect, but alive. Just as I had been taught, not everything that sparkles has value. And not everything forgotten should be left behind. 3 months after the launch of the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation, my phone started ringing more often, not from press or partners, but from the very people who once laughed in my face. Brad sent an email proposing a joint venture in an eco-restaurant chain in the suburbs. The attached deck was sleek, but not a single figure was accurate. I replied with only one sentence, learn how to track cash flow, before mentioning my capital. Victoria invited me to tea at the Langham Hotel, saying she wanted to rebuild our bond and truly admired how far you've come. I told her I was busy, but if she was interested in our mission, she was welcome to join Monday's community finance class at the estate. She never showed. Richard, ever the tactician, took a more refined approach. A week after the failed board meeting, he mailed me a typed letter-inked signature in precise blue, as if each word had been weighed. It wasn't an apology. He didn't retract a single accusation. He simply requested a serious conversation between two adults with vision. I scheduled it at a small cafe by the Charles River, not his preferred office or city club. The meeting lasted exactly 20 minutes. I listened as he outlined the synergistic potential of linking our networks to grow family-branded venture funds. I didn't nod, didn't shake my head. I only interrupted when he expressed interest in a ceremonial advisory role with the foundation. This foundation doesn't need symbolic prestige. It needs actual commitment. If you want to help, we need someone to teach a high school session on conflict of interest. But if you're just here for a nameplate, we don't have space. He stayed quiet for a long moment. Then on his way to the car, he said, "You've learned faster than most in this family ever expected." I didn't answer. The only person I've kept close is Jessica. She still lives in New Haven, still works in pediatric care, still hasn't let designer watches distract her from the core of kindness. Once a month, she drives back to Ridgefield to help assess our newest pilot, a business skills course for women who've experienced divorce or financial abuse. She doesn't talk much, but each time she steps into the estate's former kitchen, now the staff canteen, her eyes drift across the walls, like searching for the warmth of our childhood. We sit together in the spring garden, where new buds push up through the soil, never speaking of Brad or Victoria, or anyone who stayed distant too long. "Do you feel content?" Jessica asked, still watching the climbing vines Grandma once planted by hand. I held my warm mug of cinnamon tea. The breeze was damp, sweet with earth. I don't need their approval anymore. I just need to protect what Grandma wanted, a place that won't be sold, forgotten, or reduced to something people visit just for pictures before they walk away. She gave a small nod. The smile didn't last long, but it was enough to let me know I was headed in the right direction. I still live in a modest apartment in Cambridge. My old Camry just had its suspension system replaced. I've turned down book deals and speaking invitations at major conferences, offers extended not because they valued my work, but because the name Whitmore had become attached to a story that traveled far and wide. I still invest, still track charts, still comb through data lines at dawn. But I now spend more time mentoring senior economics students, helping them understand one thing: no one builds a future on borrowed glamour. Martha, the woman who quietly cleaned windows through all the years I was treated as invisible, is now retired. Every Sunday she comes to the estate, not to work, but to sit in the old kitchen, sip tea, and tell stories to the kids waiting for their class. Miss Eleanor used to tell me, that girl doesn't need a guide. She just needed others to stop standing in her way, she says whenever she catches me smiling in silence. I don't answer her. I don't have to. Instead of proving anything with words, I let each door of the estate open daily to welcome those who never thought they could walk into this world on their own 2 feet. Not for revenge, not for gratitude, but as a reminder that there are kinds of wealth that don't need spotlights, yet still dazzle those who've never bowed to true value. Audrey's story is a testament that true success doesn't have to be loud or immediately recognized. In a world obsessed with flashiness and surface-level worth, she quietly built a lasting legacy rooted in insight, discipline, and loyalty to core values. Instead of seeking revenge, Audrey rewrote her family's legacy through tangible action, creating opportunities for those once left behind. That's the power of true freedom. It doesn't need permission, only the right direction. What do you think of Audrey's choices and journey? Would you have had the same resolve in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more moving family stories to come.